They said the eye of Terra was a wound in reality, a churning storm where time itself bled, where God screamed through the vacuum of eternity, and where mortal flesh dissolved into prayer and madness. But what if something entered that infernal maelstrom not to beg, but to hunt? Imagine it, a lone figure in green armor, his boots cracking the obsidian plains of a broken demon world, his visor reflecting the light of 1,000 screaming souls. No prayer, no fear, no hesitation, only rage, only purpose. The Doomslayer, the bane of hell, cast into the eye of Terror itself. In a realm where demons are worshipped as gods, he would become something worse than myth. To the servants of chaos, he would not be a mortal intruder. He would be the echo of their own end. If this vision of brutality and cosmic horror grips your soul as it should, then join us. Subscribe, like, and share this story so that the cries of the warp echo further, and together will descend deeper into the nightmare of the 41st millennium. The sound was not thunder. It was older, heavier, like the groan of a world remembering its pain. The ground split open, vomiting streams of molten ichor that smelled of rusted blood and ozone. From that chasm rose a tower of bone and brass, shifting and alive, its structure pulsating like a wounded heart. Chains of fire hung from its ridges, dragging with them shrieking silhouettes that twisted in endless torment. The Doomslayer did not pause. The tremor beneath his boots, the echoes of demonic laughter crawling across the horizon. All of it meant only one thing: another nest to cleanse. He loaded a shell into his super shotgun, the familiar click resonating through the madness like a vow. The weapon's heat pressed against his gauntlet, and in that moment he felt the same old clarity return, the silence before the slaughter. The air thickened, bending under the will of something unseen. The wind carried whispers in a language that tried to crawl into his mind, promises of endless carnage and eternal reward. He crushed the voice in his head with a single thought: no, his war was not for them. It never had been. A shadow moved across the molten plain, vast, winged, crowned in fire. A greater demon of Khorne emerged, its armor fused to its flesh, every movement punctuated by the clang of iron and bone. It spoke his name not as sound, but as violence, a challenge echoing through the warp. The Slayer's visor flared green in response. The air convulsed as he charged. The impact was a storm. Steel against infernal sinew, divine fury against immortal hate. Every blow the demon struck could have shattered tanks. Every strike the Slayer returned tore through dimensions of flesh that screamed when split. When the dust cleared, the Slayer stood over the broken carcass of the beast, his armor drenched in boiling gore. He ripped its skull free with a motion that seemed ritualistic, offering it to no god, no banner, only to silence itself. The world around him twisted again, reality folding inward like a wound closing too slowly. He could feel eyes infinite, watching not with fear, but with fascination. The warp was reacting. It had not met something like him before. Not a mortal, not a demon, something else. A whisper slithered through the air, a voice that wasn't voice at all, carried on the static of creation itself. You do not belong here, mortal Slayer. The tone was both mocking and intrigued. Your fury stains the fabric of our domain. He ignored it. The Slayer turned his gaze toward the crimson horizon, where a structure towered above the ruin, a fortress built from skulls fused with machinery, an unholy manufactorum of war. Its spires bled light into the sky, forming symbols that pulsed with unnatural rhythm. Even the air was alive here, thick with the smell of promethium and death. He began to walk, step by step, each boot sinking slightly into the molten ground as the landscape reshaped to resist him. Above him, the clouds coalesced into the shape of an eye, vast, lidless, and filled with a swirling red storm. The eye of Terra itself, perhaps, or maybe the gaze of something worse. The wind screamed again, and with it came the first signs of pursuit. Demons in armor that looked like parody mockeries of human design, jagged, burning, moving with hunger that transcended flesh. They carried weapons that spat black flame and spoke in tongues that melted stone. The Slayer did not draw back. Instead, he reached behind him and pulled from his back the heavy weapon that had leveled legions, the crucible, its blade humming with a resonance that split the silence like divine judgment. The demons faltered for a heartbeat, as if recognizing the memory of extinction within that glow. Then they charged. He met them in the center of the plain. Each swing of the crucible left trails of burning light, cutting through demonic bodies like paper through fire. Their screams painted the air with static. One tried to impale him with a serrated pike. He caught it mid-thrust, shattered the shaft, and drove the broken metal through its skull. The ground was slick with molten ichor, the scent of ozone mixing with scorched skin. But even as he fought, the world continued to change, reacting, adapting, learning him, something deep beneath. The soil pulsed again, slower this time, deliberate. The rivers of flesh nearby stopped flowing, as if the world itself held its breath. Then, from the rift the Slayer had first emerged from, came a sound like the tearing of an entire galaxy. Something colossal was coming through, and for the first time since his arrival, the Doomslayer paused, not out of fear, but recognition. It was not hell calling him this time. It was something else, something older. The voice was a tremor that crawled through the marrow of the world itself. It did not speak in words, not truly. It impressed them, burned meaning into the mind like a brand. You are not of this Imperium, nor of the warp, it said, its tone carrying both contempt and curiosity. The Doomslayer felt the weight of it pressing against his skull, like a mountain of molten glass trying to crush thought itself. But there was no thought to crush, only purpose. His eyes, hidden behind the cracked green sheen of his visor, flicked toward the horizon. There, amidst the bleeding clouds, something vast stirred. The demon prince revealed itself in fragments. First came its shadow, a continent of moving flesh, then the form, part war engine, part god. Its body was sculpted from obsidian plates, fused with veins of living brass. 1,000 faces screamed across its surface, each one a memory of the lives it had devoured. It hovered above the ground, its wings crackling with lightning that reeked of burning ozone. The air around it warped, gravity buckling under its presence. The Slayer tightened his grip on the crucible, the hum of its blade rising like a war hymn. The demon laughed, a sound that shattered the stone ruins and sent rivers of molten ichor surging upward like geysers. You cannot kill what exists in every sin, it thundered. You cannot end what your kind created. Its voice was honeyed corruption, dragging the echoes of dead worlds behind every word. But the Slayer didn't answer. He simply began to walk forward. Each step left a trail of glass where the molten dust cooled beneath his boots. The demon's grin faltered, just slightly. For even here, in the heart of chaos, that silence, that pure refusal to kneel, to even acknowledge the divine, was a kind of blasphemy no demon could comprehend. The creature struck first. Its arm, a cascade of living metal and flame, lashed out, tearing through towers of bone and ash. The impact sent a shockwave that cracked the horizon. The slayer was gone before it hit, moving like a bullet through nightmare air. He slammed into the demon's chest, driving the crucible deep into its hide. The world flashed white. For a heartbeat, the demons in the distance screamed in unison, not out of fear, but instinct. The warp itself recoiled. When the light faded, the slayer was on one knee, smoke curling from the seams of his armor. The demon prince staggered, its wound a glowing fissure that refused to close. It roared, the sound like the death of stars. "You bleed the warp," it said, disbelief mingled with awe. "What are you?" The slayer rose. His armor hissed, vents expelling the stench of charred flesh and machine oil. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The only answer he ever gave was in violence. And so he gave it again. The fight became a storm, not of motion, but of will. Each blow bent reality, each collision of blade and claw spilling fragments of unreality into the air. Sparks became fireflies of chaos light, drifting through the ruin like dying stars. The demon's blood splattered across the battlefield, its texture like molten mercury, sizzling where it touched him. Yet it did not burn him. Nothing from this realm ever truly could. His presence was an infection, an intrusion from a place even hell feared. And the world knew it. The sky screamed as fissures of light cracked across its surface, revealing void beyond void. Demons fled into the distance, abandoning their shrines and altars, their faith unraveling into mist. The demon prince fell to one knee, its voice breaking into 1,000 discordant tones. "Even gods have names. Give me yours," it demanded, its breath a storm of acid wind. The slayer looked up at it, the glow of his visor reflecting the dying fires around them. He tilted his head, a single motion that conveyed both refusal and finality. Then, with a sound like the tearing of a universe, he drove the crucible upward through the demon's throat. The explosion was silent, pure light, pure erasure. When it cleared, nothing remained but the echo of a scream swallowed by eternity. For a long moment, the slayer stood amid the ruins. The ground pulsed beneath him, the heartbeat of the world slowing. The rivers of flesh congealed into stone, and the storms above dimmed into silence. But silence here was never peace. It was the inhale before another nightmare. From the horizon, the light of something golden flickered faintly through the clouds. Not chaos fire, not demonic radiance, something else, structured, mechanical, a signal, a machine world burning beneath the hand of gods. The slayer turned toward it. The air broke before they even touched. Not wind, not shockwave, something deeper. Like existence itself was bending to avoid the collision. The Doomslayer met the demon prince in the heart of the warp storm, and the universe seemed to flinch. Every blow he struck bled silence into chaos. Every counter the demon made spat creation in reverse, matter unraveling into shrieking color. It wasn't battle. It was contradiction made manifest, an unstoppable force that refused to acknowledge the rules of a world built on sin. The prince was vast beyond comprehension. Its wings formed a void light, each beat tearing new rifts into the sky. It laughed as it fought, not in arrogance, but desperation. The laughter of something that had never been opposed and could not understand why it now bled. Its claws scythed through the ruins, flaying mountains of bone, turning spires to ash. But the Slayer did not stop. He drove forward through flame, through flesh, through the tide of things that should not live. His armor was cracked, runes of infernal energy clawing across its surface, trying to burrow inside. The mark of the crucible glowed at his chest, rejecting the infection like an immune system made of vengeance. Around them, the world began to dissolve. Rivers of flesh turned to vapor, the ground sagging as gravity itself lost faith. The sky folded inward, revealing a void streaked with impossible constellations. The smell of burning ozone mixed with something sweet, a scent like blood boiled in incense, the perfume of damnation. The demon prince raised its head, bellowing words in the language of gods, its voice turning the air into liquid fire. It was no longer fighting to win. It was fighting to survive. The Slayer tore through its guard, his movements neither graceful nor chaotic. They were inevitable. The super shotgun roared, its echo folding through the dimensions, shredding the demon's form with every pull of the trigger. Each shell hit like a verdict from a higher law. When his ammunition ran dry, he threw the weapon aside, leaped onto the creature's chest, and drew the crucible once more. The blade screamed as it ignited, a beam of crimson energy that hummed with the resonance of all things that must end. He plunged it deep. For an instant, the warp froze. Demons that had been watching from the edges stopped moving. The rivers, the sky, the clouds, all of it suspended, caught between existence and the memory of what existence used to be. The prince's scream tore through the layers of reality, its wings folding inward as light bled from its wounds. "You cannot exist here," it howled, its voice fracturing into 1,000 overlapping tones. "You are not of matter, nor soul, nor sin." The Slayer pressed deeper, the crucible's blade burning brighter. He said nothing. He only watched as the demon's body imploded, folding in on itself until there was nothing left but a single drop of blood, black, smoking, and impossibly dense. It hovered in the air for a heartbeat before falling into the dust. Where it touched, the ground did not burn. It healed. The corruption receded from that single point, reality knitting itself together around the crater. The sky, still screaming, began to calm. And for the first time in 1,000 ages, the world of chaos bled out. The warp had been wounded, but even as the silence spread, a deeper pulse began beneath his feet, not demonic, not divine, something mechanical, rhythmic, the thrum of engines, the cadence of manufactured power. A voice crackled faintly through the air, distant and broken, like an old vox channel long forgotten. Words in a human tongue. Binary cant. Machine prayers. The Slayer turned toward the sound. Beyond the horizon, where the storm thinned and the colors bled into gray, the outline of a structure shimmered, angular, metallic, colossal. It was not born of chaos. It was built. Towers and forges, chained together by rivers of molten promethium, each bearing the sigil of the Imperium, the double-headed Aquila. Blackened by age, but unbroken, he began to walk toward it, through a landscape trying to reform itself behind him. Each step he took left stability in its wake, the air losing its madness, the ground turning solid again. The warp recoiled, retreating like an ocean from a burning shore. In his wake, silence grew heavy, final dot, and somewhere, far above the Imperium, aboard ships of gold orbiting lost stars, instruments flared with readings that should not exist. A mortal life form, unbound by psychic trace, uncorrupted by warp resonance, walking across. A demon world that should have been devoured whole, The priests would call it an omen. The custodes would call it impossible. The Inquisition would call it heresy. But the Doomslayer did not care what they called it. He had found his next battlefield. The roar shook the horizon like the cracking of a planet's crust. It wasn't sound, it was presence. The warp shuddered, its crimson mists curling away as if recoiling from what approached. The Doomslayer turned toward the source, boots grinding against the mountain of skulls beneath him. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the slow drip of blood from the corpses around him. Even here, where death was eternal and rage infinite, something was watching him with intent. The blood mist began to part, and from it emerged a war engine of flesh and iron, an ancient demon engine shaped in the image of Khorne's will. It moved on all fours, each limb a fusion of chain blades and bone pistons, its armor plated with centuries of gore. Upon its back stood a figure larger than any mortal warrior, encased in the Baroque horror of World-Eater plate. His armor was the color of old blood, its surface carved with brass runes that pulsed with hunger. His name was spoken only in roars and whispers: Kargoth, the Red Butcher. Lord of the 8th Company, one of Angron's lost hounds, the Doomslayer stared up at him, visor reflecting the demon engine's crimson glare. Kargoth's laughter thundered through the wasteland, booming through the skull towers. So, the mortal comes to bleed, he growled through his vox grill, his words dripping with zealotry. You've slain my warriors, torn the skin from Khorne's domain, and yet you do not scream. You do not praise. His tone shifted from amusement to fury. That ends now. He leaped from the demon engine, his impact cracking the skull planes like an artillery strike. Chains hung from his pauldrons, ending in severed heads that still twitched with afterlife spasms. His chain axe, Gore Fury, ignited in a cyclone of sparks. He swung first, his strength obscene, the air whistling as the blade cut through sound itself. The Slayer courted mid-swing, his gauntlet locking round the weapon's jagged teeth. Metal screamed. Sparks rained. For a moment, both stood locked in contest, a god's champion against the man who defied hell. Kargoth's helm tilted, confusion twisting into rage. He pushed harder, and the ground sank beneath their feet. The Slayer didn't move. His armor groaned, ancient servos whining, but his stance was unbroken. With a sharp jerk, he tore the axe free and buried his fist into the warlord's chestplate, the impact ringing like thunder across the field. Kargoth staggered back, the indentation glowing where the blow landed, not with heat, but with something purer, purging. The World-Eater roared, smashing a gauntlet into the Slayer's visor, cracking it slightly. Shards of light refracting through the fracture. But the Slayer's counter came faster, a sweep of the crucible's edge that tore through the air in a streak of blood-red light. The energy blade carved into Kargoth's armor, splitting the rune of Khorne that blazed across his chest. The wound erupted, not with blood, but with flame. A backlash of rage turned inward. Kargoth dropped to one knee, chains thrashing like serpents. "What are you?" he snarled, spitting embers through his vox grill. The Slayer said nothing. He simply took a step forward, his boots crunching through skulls that once belonged to kings and demons alike. The silence between them was worse than any roar, a defiance that cracked the foundation of worship itself. In that silence, the warp began to shift. The skies darkened, the red mists coiling tighter as if to watch the moment unfold. And then came the war horns, deeper this time, echoing across plains. The roar of World-Eaters across the demon world as entire warbands turned their gaze toward the impossible, their champion brought low. Kargoth, bleeding from the wound that would not close, raised his axe again, screaming, "I fight in the name of." He never finished. The slayer moved like lightning. The crucible flared, severing both arm and voice in one motion. The Lord's body fell, crashing into the field of skulls with a sound like an avalanche of bones. The demon engine behind him howled, its organic metal twisting in grief and fury before detonating in a bloom of warp fire. The explosion tore open the horizon. Blood rained in sheets, drenching the world in red mist. And yet, in the heart of it, the Doomslayer stood untouched, smoke and fire coiling around him like banners. His armor steamed, the cracks along his visor glowing faintly from within. Around him, silence returned, a silence the warp had never known, far beyond. Beyond even the demon storms, something ancient stirred, a presence older than chaos, a hunger that was not born of blood but memory. The Slayer turned his gaze toward the dark horizon, where the warp bled into the faint silhouette of reality itself. There, in the distance, the echo of the Imperium called Dot. The ground heaved, trembling like a living beast in pain. Molten blood erupted from the cracks, scalding the air with the scent of iron and burning promethium. The Doomslayer steadied himself as the skull planes split apart, each fissure glowing with the light of a buried sun. From the chasm below, a sound rose, a metallic bellow, ancient and mechanical, fused with something that breathed. Then the thing emerged. The demon engine clawed its way into the open. A hybrid abomination of iron and flesh, 10 stories tall and forged in the image of Khorne's fury. Brass plating fused with veins of pulsing meat, its every movement accompanied by the grinding of gears soaked in ichor. 1,000 skulls were riveted across its hull, their hollow sockets filled with fire. The air distorted around it, as though reality itself struggled to bear its existence. Its massive treads crushed the corpses of its own legionaries without pause, leaving behind trails of gore and steam. At its center was a furnace, a blazing core that pulsed like a heart, fed by the souls of the fallen. Chains hung from its limbs, dragging screaming servitors half melded into the machine's hide. The Doomslayer watched in silence, his visor catching the reflection of the Colossus as it raised its head to the storm. The demon engine roared, the sound so deep it seemed to claw inside his chest. Even the warp hesitated. The Slayer reached behind his back, locking his gauntlet around the hilt of the crucible. The blade flared to life, humming with crimson light, not holy, not profane, but something older, something pure. The machine's eye, a singular, glowing orb of brass and madness, turned toward him. For an instant, time slowed. The demon engine moved first. Its cannons ignited with liquid fire, the ground boiling as bolts of infernal energy cut through the battlefield. Each impact was an apocalypse in miniature. The Slayer was already moving. He darted between the blasts, his silhouette framed by fire. When one shell struck near him, he emerged from the smoke, sprinting across a collapsing ridge of skulls, leaping onto a length of broken chain that whipped through the air. He landed on the creature's limb, boots digging into corrupted steel. Sparks flew as he climbed, punching into the metal with each movement, forcing his way up through layers of armor that screamed as they broke. The demon engine writhed, its voice a symphony of rage. Chains lashed at him, bladed tendrils striking from every direction. The Slayer caught one mid-swing, twisted it until the link snapped, and drove it back into the machine's flesh. Black ichor poured out, sizzling against his armor. The crucible ignited once more, slicing a molten path across the creature's flank. Inside its hull, the souls of the damned howled louder, their pain feeding the engine, their screams turning into fuel. It grew stronger, angrier, its claws pounding the ground in fury. But the Slayer did not slow. He moved like inevitability itself, every motion precise, every strike decisive. When he reached the furnace at its core, he jammed his fist through the outer shell, pulling free a mass of twitching cables and screaming tendons. The machine roared, shuddering as the fire within it flared uncontrollably. The Doomslayer tore the crucible through its chest, carving open the heart of the beast. Light poured out, blinding, red, absolute. The explosion that followed was not sound, but pressure. A tidal wave of flame tore through the plane, sending debris and bone flying in every direction. For a moment, everything was engulfed. When the light faded, the Slayer stood alone in the crater. Around him, the ground had turned to glass, still pulsing faintly with residual heat. The demon engine was gone, reduced to fragments of molten brass and drifting ash. Only its skull remained, half buried in the cracked earth, its hollow sockets staring into the abyss it had served. He turned away, the storm above beginning to calm. But the silence did not last. The warp shifted again, the air vibrating with a new rhythm, the deep, mechanical cadence of war drums that did not belong to chaos. In the distance, across the bleeding horizon, faint lights began to flicker, cold, structured, artificial. It was not demonic. It was human. Somewhere beyond the ruins of Khorne's domain, the Imperium stirred. The world burned like an offering. Flames clawed at the sky, twisting into the shapes of screaming faces before collapsing into ash. The demon engine lay broken, its molten core spilling across the battlefield like blood from a god's wound. Each pulse of dying energy cast long shadows over the Doomslayer's armor cracked, blackened and yet unbowed. The silence that followed was not peace. It was awe. It was fear. Even the warp itself seemed to hesitate, recoiling from the anomaly it had birthed. The Slayer stood at the center of that ruin, a figure carved from the language of destruction, his presence warping reality as though the laws of gods no longer applied. For a moment, all that existed was heat, unbearable, suffocating heat, and the metallic taste of blood in the air. The rivers of gore hissed into vapor, rising into clouds that glowed red under the eternal storm. The scent was intoxicating to the entities that lurked beyond sight, a perfume of carnage meant to summon them. But none came. None dared. Something about this silence was wrong. Something about him was wrong. The Doomslayer lifted his head, and through the haze he could feel the eye of Terra staring back. That vast, endless wound in the galaxy, the mouth of chaos itself, pulsed faintly, as though recognizing him. Some say the warp knows its own children. But this was not kinship. It was fear. The demons that had once screamed for blood now whispered, uncertain. The throne of Khorne remained still, its master watching from his brass citadel with an emotion not felt in millennia. Curiosity, then came the sound. Not the crash of war or the roar of vengeance, but chanting, low, distant, human. Through the warp's haze, across time and space, voices rose from a world untouched by the ruin of chaos. Terra's priests, draped in crimson vestments, murmured the litany of dominion. They spoke of a figure seen in fire dreams, one who stood unbent before gods. A figure wreathed in flame, faceless and unyielding. They named him not as a man, nor as a demon, but as a judgment, a living weapon that defied the heavens themselves. Rumors spread like contagion. Among the Astra Militarum, soldiers whispered of omens painted in blood. On the Forge Worlds, Magi reported vox signals that carried no origin, encoded in patterns resembling heartbeat rhythms, ones that matched the Slayer's pulse from old data archives, long erased from Imperial record. Some even claimed that servitors, upon hearing his name, froze mid-task and began to chant a single word. Return. The Doomslayer did not know, nor care, for such things. His gaze turned toward the horizon, where the burning plains met the bleeding sky. Something was calling faint, yet irresistible, like the echo of a war unended. His boots sank into scorched earth as he began to walk, leaving behind trails of ash that shimmered with light not of this realm. Every step sent tremors through the ground, through the fabric of the warp itself, as though the universe flinched at his persistence. Far above, in the swirling depths of the eye, a ripple spread, faint but undeniable. The great powers stirred, their whispers colliding in storms of psychic fury. Some called for vengeance, others for alliance. But one, the oldest, the bloodiest, laughed. It was said that Khorne's laughter could split a planet, and yet now it sounded hollow. His champion had fallen, his engine destroyed, and his dominion scarred by something beyond faith or fury. In the dying embers of that world, the Doomslayer looked up once more. The red glow of the warp reflected across his visor, and for a fleeting instant, the reflection formed the faint outline of the Imperial Aquila, cracked, incomplete, but unmistakable. Whether it was a trick of the light, or a sign of something far greater, none could tell. Beyond that sky, on the worlds of man, the vision spread faster. Psychers screamed in unison, collapsing under waves of images. A lone figure walking through infernal fire, his presence extinguishing demons like breath upon a candle. Some believed it a prophecy, others a curse, and deep within the catacombs of Terra, beneath the watch of the Adeptus Custodes, the Astronomicon flickered, not in failure, but in recognition. The eye of Terra pulsed once more, as if exhaling. The descent tore through clouds of ash and static. The world below glimmered like a wound, a metallic scar across the void, pulsing with infernal light. This was not a planet that lived. It functioned. Its atmosphere choked with industrial fumes, its orbit littered with the skeletons of derelict ships still bound by cables of black steel. Even from the stratosphere, Doomslayer could feel the thrum, that rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that seemed to echo the warp's own madness. When he landed, the impact rang through iron soil that bled promethium. Sparks danced in the toxic air, swirling like ghosts around him. He stood within the ruins of a world long abandoned by the Omni-Messiah, yet worshipped still not in faith, but in perversion. The dark Mechanicum's dominion stretched in every direction, a horizon of blasphemous geometry. Spires of twisted metal jutted from the ground like broken fangs, their tips glowing with energy that smelled of ozone and burned flesh. Chains hung between them, heavy with the remnants of failed experiments, half machine, half soul, whispering prayers that dissolved into static. The Slayer moved through them without pause, each step sinking slightly into the soft, rust-colored dust that covered everything. The ground itself was warm, as if alive. Fox, chants murmured from unseen sources. The corrupted tech priests of this world, once noble servants of Mars, had reshaped their litanies into heresies. Their voices bled together into a binary chorus that rippled through the air. Praise and pain merged into one distorted prayer. Each tone resonated differently in the Slayer's mind, forming no language he could understand, yet their intent was unmistakable. They knew, they felt him. Across the city's endless manufactoria, the network of machines stirred, sensing his presence as though the planet's data veins themselves had flinched. He walked through a cathedral of steel, its ceiling lost to shadow, its pillars shaped like servitors nailed to their posts, their organic parts withered, their mechanical limbs twitching. Each of them carried a lumen, flickering faintly, painting the walls in trembling light. The Slayer's visor reflected their glow like the eyes of a predator in deep water. Somewhere above, massive gears turned, grinding against one another with a noise that sounded disturbingly like breath. It was said, in half-forbidden Mechanicus scripture, that certain forge worlds of the Dark Mechanicum had achieved symbiosis, a merging of machine and demon into something beyond control. But this one breathed. Every sound, every vibration was part of a rhythm too deliberate to be chaos. The city wasn't decaying, it was alive. Its vox lines pulsed like arteries. The heat from below carried a strange musk, like iron mixed with oil and blood. The Slayer paused at the entrance of a great manufactorum, its gates split open like a wound cauterized by war. Beyond them lay a cavern of light and movement. Conveyor belts ran without end, carrying the pieces of things that should not exist, limbs of brass, faces molded from circuitry, weapons that pulsed like living flesh. Above them, a figure hung suspended, a tech priest, stripped of humanity, his body a scaffold of wires and pistons. His voice, when it came, was not spoken but transmitted directly through the air in bursts of binary shrieks. Flesh unregistered, signal unknown, function disruption. The sound vibrated in the bones. The manufactorum shuddered. All around, the machines began to stir, gears reversing, pistons slamming, mechanical limbs unfolding from walls like predators uncoiling. Sparks rained from the ceiling as servitors tore free from their sockets, their eyes burning with unholy light. But the Slayer moved first. His shotgun roared once, twice thunder, in a place that had forgotten the sound of freedom. Steel shattered. The binary prayers became screams. He tore through them like a storm of inevitability, every motion precise, brutal, final. Sparks painted the air gold, the smell of burning circuits mixing with the scent of charred flesh. He drove his gauntlet through a servitor's skull, crushing glass and bone in the same motion, then hurled its twitching body into the gears above. The machinery screamed, not in pain, but in resistance. Then came the data dash scream. It rose from the deep places of the forge world, a digital roar that shook the metal foundations and turned every lumen blood red. Through every vox grill and conduit, the same message repeated one word. Distorted but clear. Arrival. The walls pulsed in response. Lights dimmed, and beneath his feet the ground began to shift. The Slayer turned as the floor split open, molten light spilling upward, casting his shadow like a god of judgment against the wall. From that blazing chasm rose something immense, a figure wrapped in cables, crowned with rotating cog halos, its body a monstrous fusion of Mechanicus artifice and warp-born corruption. The Mogos Dominus of this world, the one who had sold his soul to Data and Demon both, had awakened. His voice came not through sound, but through thought, carried in static and whispers. "Welcome, intruder," it said. "The machine spirit remembers your kind." The manufactorum went dark. Only the Slayer's visor burned. The air around the molten core of the forge world shimmered like glass stretched to its breaking point. Heat bled from every surface, turning the iron halls into living furnaces. Pipes groaned beneath the strain, dripping molten promethium in long, glowing threads that hissed when they hit the ground. Doomslayer stood within that inferno, a silhouette of defiance against a godless machine realm. Across from him, framed by the crimson glow of the foundry's heart, hung the dark Magos, a creature so far beyond humanity that even the warp hesitated to claim him. The Magos were suspended by tendrils of black steel that writhed like serpents, connecting his twisted frame to the cathedral's walls. His flesh was a mosaic of augmetics, bone replaced by bronze, skin by iron, veins by liquid data that pulsed through transparent tubing. His head, if it could still be called that, had been split open and reforged into a crown of lenses and fiber optics. Every movement he made was accompanied by the hiss of hydraulics and the low hum of ancient machinery. When he spoke, it was not sound but vibration, a modulation that made the air itself tremble. "You are a variable, unrecorded," the Magos intoned. His voice fractured across frequencies, part prayer, part code, an algorithm of violence unaligned with the machine god's calculus. "Tell me what purpose drives your recursion." The Slayer said nothing. His silence was his creed. He moved, swift as thought, and the world responded. Bolts of plasma screamed from the walls. Servitors reanimated by the Magoses were lurched forward, their limbs snapping into weapons of rust and teeth. The manufactorum erupted in chaos. Chains snapped from above as the entire structure began to shift, gears rotating into new configurations. The Mogos had become one with his world, the city itself bending to his commands. Each step the Slayer took left a crater in the floor. Every strike another punctuation in the hymn of destruction. He tore through the first wave of abominations, their synthetic blood hissing against his armor. The smell of burning oil mixed with scorched metal and something older, the stench of humanity buried beneath centuries of machinery. Above the battle's roar came the Magos' voice again, echoing through the vox systems embedded in the walls. "Once we served Terra. Once we believed the Omnissiah's light was pure. But data reveals what faith conceals. The machine god is not divine. He is incomplete." The words reverberated like heresy carved into the marrow of the planet. With every syllable, servitors convulsed, fusing into one another, forming titanic constructs of cable and rage. They moved like mechanical titans, each step shaking the structure, each swing of their limbs cutting air itself. But the Slayer did not falter. His shotgun thundered in rhythm with the pulse of the forge, its explosions painting the walls in molten gold. He closed the distance between them, tearing apart the Guardians one by one until the Magos himself loomed above, encased in a sphere of rotating machine parts. "You cannot destroy function," the creature hissed. "You can only interrupt it." The Slayer's response was simple, a step forward, then another. He hurled himself into the sphere, breaking through layers of reinforced ceramite and war steel, his fists pounding through armor, circuitry, and bone alike. Sparks showered. The chamber, as the Magos' tendrils writhed and lashed out, impaling the Slayer's armor, tearing gouges into its plating. Blood hissed against the metal, but the Slayer didn't stop. He caught one of the Magos' limbs mid-strike, crushed it, and drove it back into the creature's chest. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, lights exploded, conduits burst, and the manufactorum howled like a dying god. The Magos's voice fractured, breaking into layers of static and panic. You don't understand. There is data beyond the eye. Fragments from a world not yet consumed. The Aquila still burns. The Imperium still lives. For a fraction of a second, the Slayer paused. The sound of the Aquila, that ancient symbol of humanity's hope, flickered like memory. Then the Magos screamed. He reached toward the control console embedded in his chest, his remaining hand slamming into it with desperate strength. Below them, the forge floor began to split apart, revealing a vault sealed in gold and iron. Ancient runes flared to life along its surface, imperial in design, uncorrupted by chaos. The Magos's body convulsed as circuits overloaded, blue fire spilling from his open wounds. Access granted, he hissed, voice fading into distortion. Behold the truth buried beneath decay. The explosion came in silence. A flash of light, a wave of heat, and then stillness. The Magos's remains hung from their cables, motionless, steam rising from his broken form. The Slayer stood amid the wreckage, his armor scorched, visor reflecting the pulsing light below. The vault door shifted once, then twice, and with a groaning roar of ancient hydraulics, it began to open. A blinding light poured from within, cold and pure, cutting through the haze of the forge. For the first time since his arrival in this cursed dimension, the light felt familiar. It felt human. The descent began like a fall into the heart of a dying god. Each step took Doomslayer deeper through the bowels of the dark Mechanicum's world, a labyrinth of twisted metal and forgotten prayers. The walls trembled with the ghosts of machine spirits that had once sung hymns to the Omnisphere. Now they screamed in corrupted binary, their voices echoing through shattered vox lines like insects gnawing on iron. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of promethium and burned oil tinged by something older, the faint, metallic tints of sanctified blood. The deeper he went, the less the machines resembled creation, and more they became confession. Every piston, every gear, moved not to build, but to atone. The corridors opened into a chamber vast enough to swallow cities. There, standing sentinel in silence, were thousands of dead souls. Their skeletal frames were fused into the walls, hands clasped in eternal devotion, eyes long since darkened. They were arranged like worshippers around an invisible altar, as if awaiting a god who never came. Dust drifted through beams of dying. Light and the static hum of long broken cogitators filled the void like ghostly breath. For the first time since entering this infernal world, Doomslayer paused, not from fear, but from recognition. There was something sacred in this silence, a faint echo of the devotion he had long thought, extinct in the galaxy's hollow heart. When he reached the vault door, it was not sealed by code or key, but by scripture. Entire verses of binary liturgy were carved into its surface, prayers written in steel, coated in soot and human oil. As he placed his hand upon it, the metal felt alive beneath his gauntlet, pulsing like the heartbeat of a dying titan. The door parted with a hiss that sounded like an exhale after millennia of suffocation. Beyond lay a chamber untouched by corruption, cold, still, and impossibly pure. Inside, a single servitor knelt before a cracked altar. Its flesh was ancient, its frame eroded by centuries of decay. But its voice, distorted through layers of static, whispered one line. Again and again, in a trembling machine lilt, the throne endures. The throne endures. The sound was broken, almost childlike. Each repetition carried less power, like a candle dying in the wind. Doomslayer watched it, motionless, the distant glow of its fading optics reflecting off his visor. In that moment, the endless rage that had driven him across worlds faltered. Here, amidst the rust and rot of heresy, faith had not been extinguished. It had endured, fragile, flickering, but alive. He knelt not in prayer, but in acknowledgement. With a touch that was almost reverent, he ended the servitor's suffering. The light in its eyes dimmed, leaving behind only silence. And then, as if the vault itself felt the loss, the ground began to tremble. Above, the entire forge world convulsed. Towers of blackened steel collapsed inward, manufactorums imploded in cascades of molten promethium, and the corrupted hymns of the dark mechanicum turned into agonized screams. Through the chaos, the Slayer rose, each step driving him through collapsing corridors of flame and shadow. Servitors tore themselves free from the walls, circuits sparking like fireflies as they fell. The world was dying, not in defeat, but in absolution. As he emerged from the final breach into the open storm, the sight was almost beautiful. The iron sky bled red light, and from the churning clouds, rivers of ash descended like holy rain. The city, once a monument to the broken god, burned in silence. All that remained was the echo of that fading voice, looping endlessly in his mind. The throne endures. He carried no relic, no weapon, no proof of conquest. Only that sound, that whisper that had survived where billions of screams had been silenced. Somewhere across the stars, the Astronomicon flared, not brighter, but aware, a distant flicker of light, as if it had felt the echo of something long forgotten, hope, perhaps, or remembrance. And though the Slayer said nothing, his shadow fell across the dying world like a judgment carved into time itself. Because even in silence, something had changed. The warp twisted upon itself, folding and unfolding like a wound that refused to close. Its screams grew quieter, not from peace, but from hesitation. Where Doomslayer walked, the currents bent away, like reality itself recoiling from his presence. Every step was defiance given form. The tides of unreality, once wild and untamed, broke against him and scattered, unable to swallow something so absolute. He was not of their design, nor of the Emperor's, nor even of humanity's crumbling myths. He was something older, something that refused to bow in the distance. The brass citadel of Khorne pulsed like a living heart, its walls bleeding light through veins of molten iron. The blood god's laughter, the constant thunder of slaughter that echoed across eternity, faltered for the first time. It rolled into a growl, deep and questioning, as if even Khorne could feel a predator that did not belong to his domain. Upon his throne of skulls, his burning eyes narrowed. Each one saw every battle, every death across the galaxy. Yet now they fixated on one thing, one mortal. Meanwhile, in the crystalline labyrinths of Dissench, the air shimmered with nervous energy. Tomes of prophecy fluttered open and shut by their own accord. The runes of destiny cracked and reshaped themselves, trying to accommodate the paradox of Doomslayer's existence. Scripts rewritten themselves mid-sentence, and fragments of possibility screamed in defiance of reason. One demon whispered to another, its voice like the rustle of burning paper, "He moves without fate." Nurgle's garden, once filled with jovial rot and laughter, fell silent. The flies stopped their hymns. The plagues paused their breath. From the depths of decay, the grandfather's gurgling amusement faded into a wet, uncertain sigh. Life and death, birth and putrefaction, these things obeyed his cycle. But Doomslayer was not part of that cycle. He killed not for pleasure or for contagion, but because he had to. Because existence demanded that someone must stand between life and the things that sought to devour it whole. Even in Slanish's endless chambers of indulgence, the eternal music faltered. Pleasure turned to unease, ecstasy to nausea. The prince of excess felt it, an emptiness that no desire could touch. To a being built upon indulgence, Doomslayer was the perfect insult, a soul beyond temptation, rage without weakness, purpose without corruption. And so, the four great gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, turned their gaze toward him. It was not unity, it was instinct. The way predators share silence before something greater enters the wild. Their combined attention was a storm that could unmake stars, yet Doomslayer walked through it untouched. No prayer reached him, no curse clung to him. The warp's surface rippled as their will gathered. Across demon worlds, cultists woke screaming. They carved new symbols into their flesh, uncertain whether they were worshipping or warning against what was coming. Some claimed to see him in their dreams, a figure of fire and fury standing upon a mountain of shattered sigils, facing four shadows that filled the void. Others spoke of a silence so absolute it drowned out the laughter of the gods themselves. Through it all, Doomslayer did not slow. His armor bore the scars of 10,000 wars, his visor reflecting storms of impossible color. He did not hear their whispers, or perhaps he simply did not care. To him, the warp was no different from any other battlefield, another infestation to cleanse, another nest of rot to burn. Yet in his wake, something ancient stirred. The very fabric of chaos seemed to recoil, uncertain whether this intruder was a mistake, or a message. In the black void between dimensions, a ripple spread. The demons who felt it fell to their knees, not from faith, but from terror. Because in that moment, even the gods realized something they had never considered. The Slayer was not sent by anyone. He was sent for something, and that realization, that trembling, impossible truth, reached the heart of the Imperium like a pulse. The laughter, the chaos, the infinite noise, all of it dimmed to a single uneasy silence. The gods, for all their might, did not speak. They simply watched, and in that shared stillness, one question lingered like a blade held at the throat of creation itself. What if he was never meant to be stopped at all? The demon world cracked beneath his boots like glass under thunder. Each step the Doomslayer took tore through the skin of reality itself, a wound upon a wound, bleeding light and shadow in equal measure. The air screamed around him. Rivers of molten promethium poured from the mountains, burning the corpses of demons that had once worshipped their masters in eternal frenzy. But now their gods watched in silence, because the thing that moved among them was not prey. It was judgment. He had become the paradox their theology could not contain. Flesh that refused corruption, mortality that had outlived mortality. The gods of chaos, for all their infinite nature, were creatures of emotion, rage, lust, decay, and deceit. And yet, before him, they saw something alien, something that existed outside the law of sin and salvation. Khorne bellowed from his throne of skulls, his laughter a storm that shattered the skies of 1,000 demon worlds. Yet deep within that roar was confusion, a note of disbelief. The blood god had never known hesitation. Until now, Tissinge, weaving the threads of destiny through an ocean of screaming color, found his labyrinth unraveling. His endless foresight saw nothing. Every attempt to predict the Slayer's next motion ended in static, in the sound of thunderous footsteps echoing through every path at once. For a being that defined itself through manipulation, this was torment, a variable he could not control, a creature he could not foresee. The changer of ways felt change for the first time, and it frightened him. Nurgle's garden wilted. His laughter, so full of rot and affection, soured into silence. The grandfather's gifts, disease, resilience, rebirth, held no power over this creature. Doomslayer did not fear death, nor did he fear pain. He simply endured, endlessly, without the comfort of decay. To Nurgle, this was not purity. It was a curse. Life without cycle, motion without rest, an eternal existence stripped of meaning. And even the god of plague felt pity, in a way only a monster could dot. In Slanish's shimmering palace, where sensation became worship and desire shaped form, the music stuttered. The endless chorus of pleasure paused, struck mute by the presence of one who desired nothing. Doomslayer was a void in their symphony, an absence so pure that it made indulgence taste like ash. The Prince of Excess leaned forward on their throne, golden eyes reflecting the silhouette of the Slayer as if gazing into a mirror that refused to answer. Curiosity turned to longing. Longing turned to terror. The warp convulsed. Across demon worlds, temples cracked and fell, unable to contain the paradox of his existence. Cultists, who once carved his name in fear, now whispered it as prayer. To them, he was the Emperor's hidden weapon, a spirit forged from the rage of mankind itself, the unbroken flame. To others, he was the fifth god, a manifestation of vengeance given form. But the truth was far crueler. Doomslayer was not divinity. He was rejection. He was everything the gods could never be, a being of choice, not hunger. And then the noise stopped. The battlefield dissolved into silence, an impossible stillness that bent the warp's laws to his will. He stood upon ground that was not ground, a plain of shifting mirrors and liquid shadow. The demons vanished. The colors bled away. Even time seemed to step back. In that absolute void, Doomslayer felt something stir, not rage, not defiance, but recognition. A presence loomed before him, vast yet shapeless, like the reflection of a god seen through a shattered mirror. It spoke without sound, its voice vibrating through the bones of creation itself. There were no words, only intent, the echo of something older than chaos, older than faith. The Slayer's fists tightened. His heart, if it still beat, thundered once. The air grew colder, and for the first time, the gods themselves hesitated to watch, because this was not their domain. Not anymore, in that place where light had no meaning and sound dared not exist. Doomslayer came face to face with the one thing even the gods of the warp refused to name, something beyond divinity, something that remembered him. The void was not empty. It was alive, breathing, watching, remembering. Beneath its stillness was a pulse, slow and deliberate, like the heartbeat of the universe before time began. Doomslayer stood within it, surrounded by darkness so pure it devoured the notion of space. There was no up, no down, no horizon, only the faint shimmer of something vast and ancient, an unseen consciousness pressing against reality's thinning skin. His armor hummed with residual warp static, the echoes of slain gods still clinging to him like ash. For a moment he could almost hear it, the faint murmur beneath existence, a language not made for mortal thought. The place beyond the warp was not madness. It was memory. Here, the souls of forgotten empires drifted like dust. Statues of light flickered and faded, forms of saints, inquisitors, warriors who had once died believing their sacrifice mattered. Some reached out, their outlines trembling with desperate devotion, as if trying to touch the figure that stood defiant before them. Others knelt, whispering prayers that had lost their meaning centuries ago. To them, the Slayer was not man or myth, he was the convergence of both, the living weapon forged by defiance, walking where even the Emperor's gaze could not reach. Yet the voices that filled this void were not of the damned. They were of those who had believed. Faith echoed here, stripped of flesh, stripped of gods, reduced to the raw electricity of human will. And somewhere within that storm of memory, a single voice rose above all others, broken, distant, yet unmistakable. The throne endures. The same words the dying servitor had whispered deep beneath the forges of the dark mechanic. The sound rippled through the void, twisting the black into light, light into fire, until the shape of a great form emerged from the radiance. It was not the Emperor as the Imperium depicted him, not the radiant god of man's salvation, but something far more terrible. A figure suspended in a storm of gold and shadow, half machine, half soul, unendingly bound between death and dominion. His presence was not warmth, but gravity, crushing, eternal. The air hummed with fragments of his thoughts, each one a command that had long since lost its voice, duty, fire, endurance, words that built an empire and shattered it. The Doomslayer did not kneel. He did not speak. He simply stared through the brilliance, through the illusion of perfection. And for the briefest moment, the figure within the light looked back, not with rage, not with love, but with recognition. Two beings, reflections of the same defiance, separated by the cost of their own purpose. The silence between them was heavier than the war of millennia. Then the light began to fracture. The phantoms screamed. The stars twisted into molten spirals. From the cracks of creation, the voices of the chaos gods returned, shrieking in panic, clawing at the veil they could not pass. They felt it now. The intrusion, the infection, the impossible truth searing through their essence. Doomslayer was not merely within their realm, he was within their being. His rage, his defiance, his endless silence, it had sunk into the bloodstream of the warp itself, rewriting its nature from the inside. Khorne's throne shook beneath rivers of boiling blood. Tzeentch's libraries burned, their pages turning blank. Nurgle's garden rotted into sterile dust. And in Slanish's halls, the music fell into discord, every note collapsing into the hollow echo of fear. For the first time since the birth of chaos, the gods screamed in unison. The void erupted in a pulse of white flame. The light engulfed everything, stars, gods, thought itself. In that blinding instant, Doomslayer was gone. Not destroyed, not consumed, simply beyond. The warp convulsed, recoiled, as if the fabric of eternity itself had exhaled. What remained was silence, pure, infinite, incomprehensible silence. And somewhere, across the cold void between galaxies, a faint flicker rippled through the astral. A heartbeat where there should have been none. A signal, impossibly human, cutting through the warp's madness, not as light, but as will. It carried no words, no doctrine, only the echo of motion. The promise that the storm had not ended, because the storm was already inside them.